I think a lot of times, especially young people, young women are, well, I don't want to be called a bigot. I don't want to be called a transphobe or homophobic. And my response to that, anyone who says you're homophobic, anytime someone calls me transphobe or a bigot, I say, well, you know what? I think you're just truth phobic. I think you're just science phobic.
Welcome back to episode 2 of Gen Z Unplugged. We are very excited to be interviewing Hannah Faulkner today. She is going to be a rotating host on the show, and I think you all are really going to enjoy getting to know her. So without further ado, here's our interview with Hannah. Hi, Hannah. We are so excited to have you here, and we're really excited to have you as one of our rotating hosts on Gen Z Unplugged. I would love for you to just give everyone your background, but first I'll go ahead and just explain how we know you. You attended our Nashville Student Summit back in October, and when we met you, we realized you were a pretty big deal right away. You speak, you have your own podcast, The Hannah Faulkner Show, and you've even written a book all before the age of 18. So we'd love to know how you got here and just hear all about your background.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it was so great to meet all of you guys at the conference in Nashville. I hadn't heard about the Center for Conservative Women since or before that conference, and I was absolutely blown away by the work that you guys were doing. And you guys had Paula Scanlon, one of my good friends there, and I went up to her and I was like, "Oh, have you heard of this organization before?" And she's like, "Yeah, I've done so much work with them. I speak at a lot of their conferences. It's amazing." And so I ended up reaching out to you guys about I think it was like a self-defense scenario training, and you guys reached back out to me. But at that conference, I actually ended up doing an interview with like a German company that was traveling in from Germany to do some interviews with conservative media outlets or influencers. And so that was really interesting. I think they came up to you guys and were trying to find me.
Yeah, I remember that. Pretty funny. But you did the interview.
I did do the interview. That was really interesting. We can get into that in a second. But for your audience, like you said, my name is Hannah Faulkner. I'm 17. I got involved in politics, I guess you could say, when I was 13. I started a Turning Point chapter. And we had a few events here and there with a few members. It wasn't anything big, but when I was 15, August of 2022, my 7-year-old sister was paralyzed in a freak swimming accident that paralyzed her from the chest down. And so because of her accident, my family and I were placed in about 6 different medical facilities from Atlanta, Georgia, Virginia. I was born in Lynchburg, Atlanta, Georgia, Nashville, Tennessee, and then Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay.
And this same time, August of 2022, that fall of 2022, was the same exact time that we started to see political activists and some of the conservative media outlets really start to expose these medical facilities for performing genital mutilation surgeries and chemically castrating my generation. And we started to see headlines like Chloe Cole and Prisha and all of these detransitioners that at that time were probably 17, 18 years old, saying that the medical industry had destroyed their life and had lied to them, telling them that the only way for them to be successful in life or to be happy was to go down this path of destruction, frankly. And so we were able to see all of this with our own eyes, specifically at the Vanderbilt Hospital, Children's Hospital. I mean, there was such an influx of LGBTQ flags flowing around. You had people coming in with their they, them pronouns and their rainbow pens, but you'd ask them, could you have a Christian flag pen or an American flag pen? Of course you can't, but you can have, BLM pen or LGBTQ. And so we started to push back against that. And even around the time you started to see the mask mandates and how they'd kind of discriminate against you because you didn't have the vaccine or you didn't, abide by their rules and what the CDC was saying at the time, which now, of course, they're coming out saying was all wrong. So we were pushing back and we were getting notices saying that, we were causing issues at the hospital. And I remember vividly one pediatrician appointment that my sister was going into. We walk in and there's this young girl who's probably in her early 20s. She's in residency. She comes in with a gigantic pronoun pen. Says, my pronouns are they, them. And I thought to myself, I was 15, how can you claim to give parents medical advice for their children, but you don't even know something as simple as your biological sex, something as simple as your identity, what you were born to be, a male or female? And so at that moment, I was like, I have to do something about this. I have to see what kind of movement, rally, event that I can host to change the directory, especially in Tennessee, the so-called Bible Belt, right? And so I prayed and I was like, God, what can I do about this? And I felt called to do a rally, and Turning Point USA, TPUSA Faith specifically reached out and said, Hannah, would you like to do a pro-life rally? And I said, you know what? I think we need to do a Teens Against Gender Mutilation rally. So January of 2023, I hosted the first Teens Against Gender Mutilation rally with Turning Point USA, and we had 600-ish attendees come out, 200 protesters. Actually, a week before that, I went to the MTSU student little organization fair. I invited all the LGBTQ groups and the Democrat groups. I said, you know what? I'd love to hear your voice, and we care about what you have to say, and I'd like to invite you out. Well, they all came with drums and whistles and chants and lots of threats. One of the person was standing at the front of the stage calling us, all Nazis. We had 30 police officers on the ground, snipers on the roof. It was absolutely, and I think the most mind-blowing aspect of this was how there was such a lack of church involvement in this rally. I mean, it was easy to get people that attended church to come out, but pastors specifically and leaders, ministers of local churches in the Bible Belt of Tennessee to come out and support this rally. Obviously now they're all speaking out, thankfully, and proclaiming that you can't change your sex, and if you're born a male, you'll always be a male, and vice versa. Something as simple as that. But I was 15 at this time, and I remember even sharing flyers of this rally with churches and small groups, and they told me that you can't do this, it's too political. So anyways, moving on forward, actually a week before that rally, totally a God thing, I got invited by Clay Clark and General Flynn, who wrote the foreword of the book, to speak at a Reawaken America tour, and then they ended up inviting me back to speak. And then my dad, a few months after the rally and then these events that I was speaking at, he said, Hannah, you should start a podcast, you should write a book. And I told my dad, I said, I'm not starting a podcast, I'm not writing a book. It's not getting any further than having a Turning Point chapter and hosting rallies and events, because I really enjoy doing that. And September of 2023, I decided to sit down, and I started with the 5th chapter, The Poison of Gender Ideology. And I was absolutely blown away by the things that I was finding. One statistic, that the first genital mutilation surgery didn't happen in 2015. It didn't happen in 2000. It happened in the 1960s with a man named Avon Wilson at the Johns Hopkins Hospital. And so that's just a simple piece of data that no legacy media outlet is talking about. John Money, Alfred Kinsey, where did the two terms, gender and sex, when did they start getting confusing to the American public, where we're starting to see okay, well, gender is just your made up term, it's however you feel, but sex is biological. All these terms, that nobody's really willing to get into the nitty gritty of. So I started writing with that, and then I got into the other chapters, starting with the founding of the American nation, leading into the last chapter, which is the breakdown of the family unit, which I believe to be the greatest issue facing America. So I know it's a lot, but that's a little bit about how I got involved in politics.
You're so impressive, Hannah. Thank you again for coming today and for sharing how you got into the conservative fight for truth and speaking on important issues that people need to hear about today. The importance of truth and speaking, like you said in your book, a lot of people don't know about these facts that actually go on behind the scenes. They're just believing whatever media tells them. And you being 17 and already writing a book, already having your own podcast show, doing so much where people, look at you and say, wow, she's done more in her life than I've ever dreamed of, and wanting to do one of the things you've accomplished through your whole career at just 17. So being so young and in this conservative fight for truth, and what would you say to people who think that, you're only 17, you haven't experienced so many other things that people who are much older than you have, how can they believe things that you're saying if you don't have much experience in it? What would you say to people who say you shouldn't be speaking out on these political and cultural issues?
Yeah, you know what? Number one, I think it's so interesting coming from, the people who think that you can become a dog if you feel like you're a dog, or if you feel like the opposite sex one day, then you can become that. But to me, it's wild that we're even having these conversations. It's wild that we're even debating whether or not men can come into women's bathrooms. And the fact that we have a congressman, he's a man, who thinks he's a woman, Mr. Tim McBride, calling himself a woman. I don't know if you saw the video, to kind of get off on a rampage here real quick. He's sitting there saying that, we're wasting time renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. And so I posted breaking, Congressman dead names the Gulf of America. Someone very familiar with changing names should be just right and just okay with changing the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America. But anyways, going back to your point, yeah, I definitely get that. Even from conservative media or conservative individuals that you thought would support you. And I think at the end of the day, objective truth applies to everyone, regardless of your race, your ethnicity, where you come from. Objective truth, the objective reality that you can't change your sex, that men belong in men's restrooms and women belong in their spaces. That doesn't apply to just an 8-year-old or just an 80-year-old. It applies to every single person on the face of this planet. And I think once you understand that, these issues that we're talking about, yes, experience it. If you're talking about the issue of abortion, abortion, it can be helpful, to have someone who's maybe experienced that or has lived through or seen what Planned Parenthood and this death industry is doing to young women is helpful. But this is an objective truth, that life begins at conception, that all life should be protected from conception to natural death. And so once you understand that, I think it's endless from there. That argument is just a deflection tactic because they don't want you talking about these issues.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so true. Just objective truth is out of style, and I think it's coming back. It's definitely coming back. And one thing I want to talk about is your book being called The Last Chance to Save Our Republic. Do you truly believe that this is our last chance?
Yeah, when I was writing that book, obviously I started writing it in 2023, and that name, Last Chance, or my dad actually said Last Chance. I was like, Last Chance to Save Our Republic. Ben Franklin says, you have a republic if you can keep it. Right. And we look at even November 5th and the election. I mean, regardless of what side you're on, like this was good versus evil, moral versus evil that we were standing up against. And for me, personally, I believe that God's grace was on this country, allowing us to take back this country with President Trump winning the election. And it doesn't even matter if it's Republican versus Democrat. I mean, this is like, we're fighting ideals such as simple as, men can't intrude women's sports. Like, we believe that life begins at conception. We don't believe that you should be murdering babies up until after the baby has, been born through an attempted abortion. Things as simple as that, or that we should have a closed border. Something as simple as a border defines a nation. We have to have a closed border in order to protect and maintain national sovereignty and national security in our nation. But last chance to save our republic, I believe, while God's grace was on this country November 5th, this truly might be our last chance to save it. I mean, we are fighting unprecedented issues, and no moral and no sane society are its people, are its citizens cutting off their healthy body parts. And when you start realizing that these issues that we are fighting, it is no longer, taxation like it was for our founding fathers, or maybe how we worded the Declaration of Independence, or where we put the word liberty and freedom and life and happiness in the Declaration. It's now like whether or not you can change something as your biological sex. It's whether or not children should be able to be able to cut off their healthy breasts and genitals. It's whether or not you've got California, you've got Senator Scott Wiener, who just said that it shouldn't be a felony for someone to buy a 16 or 17-year-old for as a sex slave, essentially. And currently in the state of California, it's a misdemeanor. It's, basically you just get a speeding ticket. That's kind of the crime if you buy a 16 or 17-year-old for sex. And these are the issues that we're fighting in this country. And, it's interesting, even too, like talking about this being the last chance to save our republic. On the National Day of Prayer, which was May 1st, in California, on one side of the California state capitol, you had Christians doing like a national prayer. They were praying, they were preaching the gospel. And on the other side, you had self-proclaimed Satanists. And so that's when this is such an apparent battle between good versus evil. Like there's no in between. It is good versus evil right in front of our eyes. And if conservatives, if Christians do not get their heads out of the sand, this might be our last chance to save it. We have a very pivotal moment, a turning point in American history where we can take action and do something about what's happening. But it's up to us. It's up to our communities. It's up to us in our own homes, in our churches, and with our own children if we're really to protect the future generations and protect this republic.
That's so amazing. You really write those things, but you're also living that, which I think is so impressive, that you're living by these things that are so influential and so important in today's society to, stick up for what you believe and speak the truth, as well as, informing people what actually is going on, and telling them that have the courage, speak up. This is your last chance to really stand for what you believe to save America. And before we go any further, I want to take a little step back to something that you did before you became this impressive conservative activist. You were actually a motocross champion and car stock racer.
So cool.
Can you tell us a little bit about that, what that looked like, and how'd you get into that?
Yeah, so I started racing motocross competitively when I was 12 or 13 is when I really started. And I was like racing here and there, like flat track, like little local races when I was 11. But when I was 12, it was 2019, that was 6 years ago. Yeah, so I was, 11, 12-ish. 2019, I'm already getting old.
Reflecting.
2019, we show up to this race, my dad and I, and it's called Loretta Lynn's, the national championship. So people all across the world, Argentina, Canada. I mean, we've got people from, just all across the world that come, Europe, Africa, that come to race this one race. And it's the national championship for motocross. It's kind of like that step before you move into like supercross and like the pro championship races, which you see like the indoor races for like Hayden Deegan, if you guys are familiar with him. Danger Boy Deegan is what he's been deemed as. Have you heard of him?
Yes, I have.
Oh, you have? Okay, that's
She's from Tennessee.
Yeah, the Tennessee girls.
So so that was kind of this race that we went to watch, and I had actually seen like Hayden Deegan racing when I was probably 9 or 10. He was doing like the backflips with his dad and on the dirt bikes into like the foam pits, and I was like, wow, this is child abuse. Like, this is absolutely horrific. Like, who would put their kids in motocross? Who would allow their kid to race motocross? Like, this is absolutely horrible. It's like insane. Like, they're just jumping and like hoping they survive. So we go to this race, 2019. There's 42 classes, 36 to 42 classes, I believe. 2 of the classes are specifically for young girls because it's really hard. Like, this is when men and women are different. Like, this is a physically like involved sport. Cars, it's a little different. Like, you look at Danica Patrick, you look at all these women, like, you don't really have a physical advantage in cars. It's more of just like a mental component, which women sometimes do better with. Yeah, which is super cool. A better advantage there. But anyways, so in dirt bikes, you can compete with the men if you'd like, but most of the girls just want to focus on the girls' class because these are like the top 42 girls in the nation. So there's you have national qualifiers and then you have regionals. So qualifiers top 8 and then regionals top 6. So going back to 2019, my dad and I show up. We're watching the girls race, and he's like, "Would you ever like to do this? Like, would you ever be interested in this?" And I was like, "Absolutely not." He's like, "I agree. Yeah, this is not right. This is not good.
Child abuse."
So this is August of 2019 that we're watching this race, and December, January, we decide to start racing like competitively in motocross. We decide to go to the qualifier for that main race that happens in August in February of 2020. Yeah, February 2020, which is like right when COVID was starting to hit. So we go to this. It was in Kentwood, Louisiana, middle of like nowhere. Like what do they eat there? Like the crawfish.
Yeah,
crawfish.
Yeah,
crawfish. It was like a whole ordeal there in Kentwood, Louisiana. But I qualified for that race for the regional, so top 8 there. And then you go to the regional. So I raced the regional in, I don't remember where I was, maybe Texas, Baja Acres, that's Michigan. Went to Michigan, qualified for Loretta's, for the 2020 Loretta's race. And within literally like 1 year of saying it was child abuse, it's horrible, nobody should put their kids in, I was racing that race.
Wow.
Which was pretty crazy.
That's wild.
And so I raced the qualifier in February in Louisiana. Then I qualified for the regional, qualified at the regional for the national championship. Mm-hmm. From May to July, which are your primary training months, I lived at a training facility. So this was like the height of COVID. Everybody's locking down. Everybody's putting on masks, staying 6 feet apart. We're just living at a training facility, training on the bike 5 hours a day. We had supercross racers coming to the track. And there were precautions. Like, they were still a little scared off the track. But it was different. I think we trained that year in Georgia, Culloden, Georgia, I believe it was, Moto X. If the guy's watching, he might be watching. I don't know. He was a great trainer. But trained in Culloden, Georgia during the height of COVID, and then raced at Loretta's. That was the first time I had a concussion. That was pretty crazy, pretty wild. That was one of the reasons why I quit.
How many concussions?
I had five concussions. 5 concussions. Yeah. So
wow.
I guess in 2 years of racing competitively, like being on the bike 5 hours a day, I had 5 concussions. And my dad, so at the second year, it was 2021 national championship, my dad said, listen, if you want to have a brain, because I had just started getting involved with Turning Point and starting the chapter, he's like, listen, if you want to get involved in political issues and speak up for this country, you're going to have a brain. So I stopped doing that, and I kind of transitioned to stock car racing. And I liked it, but there was no thrill. Like, literally, you're all starting in the same spot, and you've got a gate. The gate drops, and you all got to take off at the same time. And whoever gets to that corner, it's like 100 foot wide to like 10 foot. And whoever gets to it first, like, gets the whole shot, and you get to take the lead in. Mm-hmm. You're racing to the corner, essentially. Like, there's no thrill. There's no adrenaline rush like that. So getting into a car where you're like it's a 6-point harness, you got a roll cage around you. There's no near-death experiences. Let's just say that. There's no, wow, I just cased that jump, and I just really survived that one. But anyways, I enjoyed it. I told my dad recently I'd be interested in getting back in the car. just for
Wow.
practice.
Wow.
My brother's actually racing the car now.
Oh
He
my
took over.
gosh.
He's
I love
pretty
it.
cool.
That's wild.
He's awesome. He's definitely a lot better at cars than I was, but I was better at dirt bikes. So we equal each other out.
Oh my
Sibling
gosh.
rivalry.
Yeah.
So cool. Okay, obvious question is, how did you do school during all of that?
I was homeschooled, which this
Okay,
is like an
that
ad for
helps.
homeschooling. All of this
Okay.
for parents listening or young people that are still in high school. Ask your parents to homeschool you. If you're a parent watching this, like homeschool your kids immediately. It's the best decision. I would not have been able to race motocross competitively, race stock cars, do what I'm doing today if it weren't for being homeschooled. And so to give like your audience a little bit of an idea, so when I graduated high school last year, I was able to do a dual enrollment and to graduate high school with my associates in criminal justice. And then I just did a ton of credits to where now I'll be able to graduate this summer right after I turn 18 with my bachelor's in pre-law. So this is like an
Amazing.
ad for
Wow.
homeschool. Like and people say, not everybody can do it. It's going to take sacrifices. Like it's going to take sacrifices for both the parents and the child, but it is 100% worth it. My dad always says, everybody's homeschooled. Everybody homeschools their kids. Some people do it for 7 hours a day, then come home and do it for 2 hours, or some people do it 2 hours a day, and that's it. So it's your choice, but I can assure you that homeschooling is like the way to go, especially in 2025 with all of these woke ideologies and teachers. I mean, I even remember like this was kind of the way, I mean, I was 5, but I remember being 5, I was in public school. That was the only time I spent in public school was in kindergarten. And 2 of my favorite teachers, the art teacher and my gem teacher, who I didn't really know. I wasn't really knowledgeable on the LGBTQ movement at 5.
Right.
Unfortunately, kids are, knowing about this stuff, which is so sad.
Right.
But I remember the 2 teachers did let us know very clearly that they were living in relationships that was kind of foreign to me, as like someone that's grown up in the church and didn't understand like that was even a possibility to live in a relationship with 2 men or 2 women.
And this is Tennessee,
Yeah, Tennessee.
Murfreesboro.
Yeah, Bible
So this
Belt.
is not at all the place where you think these kind of things would be happening.
Yeah, and that's kind of where my
Interesting.
parents were like, all right, it's time to take you out. And not just that, I remember one day, my dad was a pastor at that time, I brought in church invitations to my classmates and I was handing them out, and they sent me to the principal's office and told me I couldn't hand out church invitations because that was a violation of the First Amendment. And my dad said, okay, so can kids give out, invitations to their mosque or like, to their Muslim Islamic church, or maybe if they want to invite someone to their birthday party, is that like a violation of their First Amendment to the other student that maybe doesn't like their birthday party or like what?
Is anti-birthdays.
Yeah. Like, well, that's different because it's not Christianity.
Wow.
And again, this is like the Bible Belt of Tennessee. And, fast forward to today where you've got like school boards here in Tennessee, or we're not here in Tennessee, but in Tennessee, where they are calling themselves conservatives, full-blown supporting every single pornographic book. And these aren't just like slightly explicit, it's like sexual relations with animals. I mean, it is like absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, my dad spoke in front of one of the school board meetings and said, he read out the book, and it's literally a boy raping a young girl against her will, obviously. And this is allowed in the classrooms. He's like, this is what you guys support? This is what you guys support? And so that's what I always tell people. I mean, I get calls from people who moved from California, really excited for it to be so much better, and to move to the Bible Belt, to the conservative state of Tennessee, where we've got all these conservative politicians who in reality are worse than the Democrats, because at least the Democrats tell us exactly who they are and, don't play games with us. And so I get calls from people from California that say, Hannah, I moved here and we are fighting the same books here in Tennessee, in Rutherford County, Tennessee, that I was trying to get out of my kids' library in California, and some of the wokest places in California.
Wow, that's insane. And in regards to the pornographic books, like what you were speaking on, I know that's something that you have spoken on previously before, where people are saying, oh, well, if conservatives don't want, pornographic books in school, then we shouldn't allow the Bible then in school. And I'm just interested to hear your thoughts, if your audience hasn't heard about this, before. Why should we have the Bible in schools and not pornographic books in schools, when the Bible clearly has, rape and other, horrible things in it? Like, what makes them different?
Yeah, it's interesting. I hear that a lot, especially at the school board meetings or liberals that I have on my show. They're like, oh, you're just trying to infringe your religion upon us, which we'll get into in a second. But I think the first step that I always tell people is that is a communist tactic to convince the public that you're infringing upon the First Amendment or a violation of separation of church and state. In 1963, a woman named Patricia Nordman was warning Congress in the 1960s about the current communist goals in America. And one of those goals was to convince the public that the removal of all obscene material, whether that's in commercials, whether that's on TV, whether that's in books, whether that's in libraries, wherever it is, the removal of obscene or pornographic material is a violation of the First Amendment. That was the communist goal, was to convince the American people that you are violating my First Amendment by removing this material. So number one, that's what I tell people, is that you are siding with the current communist goals in America.
Yeah.
But number two, like, this nation was not created for immorality. John Adams said our nation was created for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for the government of any other. And I think the reason why the left is so up in arms, is so opposed to removing pornographic material, is so opposed to our Constitution and our principled values in our nation. The reason why I think they're so opposed to it is because it wasn't created for immoral people. And you look at everything the left stands on, and it's climate change, abortion, birth control, open borders, homelessness, drug addiction. I mean, the list is, all of it is immorality. And you talk about the 10 Commandments, implementing the 10 Commandments. What is wrong with the 10 Commandments? Like, explain to me what exactly is wrong about telling kids not to steal, not to murder, not to lie, to honor your parents. Explain to me what is wrong, what is immoral, what is going to create a citizenry of bad people with the 10 Commandments in schools. Like, there's nothing religious, quote unquote, about it. It's just morality. And when is the fine, like, where is the fine line? When are we as a nation, as a people, going to say, all right, that's enough? Like, we've gone so far. Because there's not, when you let in a little bit of sin, when you let in a little bit of immorality into your nation, you have no moral standard for your nation, anything is possible. And I think that's even interesting today. The most researched type of pornography is incestual. And people are like, why is that? And it's like, okay, well, when you start in the early 1900s, like with the sexual revolution of the feminist movement, where it's like easy divorce, promiscuity, sleep around with whoever you want, birth control, abortion, and then moving into homosexuality, and then transgenderism, prostitution, and then now you've got people in California, like Senator Scott Wiener and his colleagues, saying that pedophilia, it's not a crime, it's an identity, it's an orientation, sexual orientation to identify as a pedophile. How did we get here? And it's like, when you let in one level of immorality into your country and you start putting your stamp of approval on it as a nation, there's no ends to it. And so going back to your point there, I mean, again, explain to me what is wrong, number one, with the 10 Commandments being in school. But also, it's concerning to me that you will fight so hard for pornographic material to be in schools because, number one, you're ignorant to the impact this kind of material has on children, or number two, you are an addict to this kind of material. And I think that's a question that should be asked to a lot of these people.
Yeah, it's truly so revealing because those are genuinely the only two options. They genuinely are. And something you touched on a little bit that I'd love to revisit is the concept of separation of church and state. Because, in high school, if I wanted prayer to be implemented before my field hockey games, or I wanted the Bible and the 10 Commandments to be used in school as this moral basis, people would say, well, that violates separation of church and state. So would you tell our audience what that concept actually means?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Thomas Jefferson wrote that concept out. And by the way, it's not mentioned in any of our founding documents. The Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, our Constitution has nothing to say about separation of church and state. But Thomas Jefferson did write it with the intent to protect the church from state influence. And I think it's so interesting for the people who scream from the mountaintops about separation of church and state are the same people that shut down churches and places of worship and kept open casinos and strip clubs during COVID-19 because it was non-essential. But of course, these other places like bars and casinos were deemed as essential places of worship. So, and that's also super interesting coming from the people that also tell us that we need to put on a mask and stay 6 feet apart and inject an experimental, under-researched and overfunded COVID-19 vaccine. But oh wait, separation of church and state. So the people that are saying this don't even believe that for themselves. And I said this with Emily too. It's like these people, a lot of people say, like, okay, well, how is it that in 2005 Hillary Clinton and much of the Democratic Party was against same-sex marriage, but now all of a sudden they're wholeheartedly for it? And it's because the Democrats and the left, they don't really have a specific narrative or idea that they believe in, but they will push any idea or narrative to get more power and control over the American people. And that's exactly what they're doing. You look at kind of like the forefront of the left, like Jasmine Crockett, AOC, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, all of these ladies in the movement, their ideas seem to shift, like especially over the last 20 years, the ideas have shifted drastically, and people are like, whoa, the Democratic Party of 2000 was more conservative than the Republican Party of 2025. How is that? And it's because they don't really believe anything they're saying, but will push anything to get more power and control.
Yeah, back on the whole issue with pushing power and control and getting what they want out of individuals, this like leftist, radical ideology, all of that. The family unit, I think, is something that we can kind of connect with this because, it's the most fundamental, it's the most important thing is the family unit in society. And how is this communist, this Marxist ideology, which it's clearly highlighted in the Communist Manifesto, which is the destruction of the family unit because they see it as so powerful. So can you kind of, speak on that? Why is the family being targeted so much?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, the last chapter of my book is the greatest issue facing America, the breakdown of the family. Strong families make strong nations. And if you don't have the bedrock, the foundational pillar of your society between a man and a woman, which is what God created it to be. I mean, God created three main institutions, the government, the church, and the family. And if we get those three wrong, really the rest of society is going to follow in that. And so you look at the family unit, I think the world has kind of put it as the subjective truth, the subjective idea that it can be whatever, love is love. And if you love someone, then that's a marriage, that's a family, when in reality, marriage is between a man and a woman, and you don't have to be a religious person to understand that. I mean, science backs this, that the more married parent families between a man and a woman per state, the better the economy is, the lower child poverty rate. I mean, it's the country, the nation, that society is overall thriving much more than whether it's, two men or two women or a divorced family. And so you look at just how from the feminist movement, which I believe has been one of the greatest components in the breakdown of the family. I mean, you look even at the 1800s, Mary Wollstonecraft saying that her goal was to obliterate the family unit, obliterate the idea of the family unit being between one man and one woman, which I call that kind of like the sexual revolution. Some people will say it just happened in the 60s. The whole idea of the feminist movement was a sexual revolution to pit men and women against one another and to confuse our roles as male and female. And so when you as a society confuse those roles as male and female, when you confuse what the male's role and the woman's role is in society, everything else will follow. And so people say, how is it that we have a president in the White House that can't speak a sentence? How is it that we have open borders? How is it that we have crime on the rise? Well, because when you don't have a strong family unit, when you don't have good fathers in the home educating their children, being a good father to the children and a mother that's a good helpmate to her husband and a good nurturer to her children, then the children are going to suffer. I mean, 70% of criminals, 70% of prisoners come from a fatherlessness home. I mean, you look at all of these statistics that are coming out, all of it is due to the brokenness of the family unit. And so we could talk about all of these issues, whether it's the border, but it all stems from the breakdown of the family unit between one man and one woman. And so I do believe it's the greatest issue. I think so often we kind of get meddled in with a lot of different other issues, and we're like, oh, this is the greatest issue, like media propaganda. But it's how did we get to the point where we are facing these issues because of weak men and emotional women. And as a Christian, these issues are the same issues we've been fighting since the Garden of Adam and Eve, since the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve and the sin. I mean, why did Eve eat the fruit? Because Adam wasn't being the leader. He wasn't protecting Eve's heart. And Eve obviously was basing that decision off of emotion. And you look at today in 2025, women are the most liberal than ever before, and men are the most, conservative. And it's because, again, women are thinking with their emotions, well, this party, they care about, my rights, without even diving into what are these rights that they're protecting. Obviously, there's not a single right. But yeah, I believe it's the greatest issue. And I think we as a conservative movement have failed to talk about that issue enough, because until we get that issue right, until we talk and highlight about how our roles as men and women matter tremendously, we're not going to fix the girls' sports issue. And that's another thing, a lot of the conservative movements, a lot of the conservative organizations, especially fighting specifically the girls' sports issue, will say, well, absolutely, we shouldn't have men and women's sports. This is totally wrong. This is against science. This is, not right. There's nothing about promoting women's rights. It's diametrically opposed to the idea of women's rights, allowing men and women's spaces. But it's like, well, we first got to call out the beginning. How did we get to the point where we have men and women's sports? Well, it's by confusing our roles as men and women and kind of pushing this idea that there's no difference between men and women. It's just a social construct, which is what the feminist movement was pushing in the 80s and 90s. And so now you get to where in 2025, it's like men are in our sports, men are in our locker rooms. Well, there's no difference between us. It's just a social construct. You can identify it as, whatever and whoever you want, because it's just social construct.
Gosh, that is all so true. And you touched on this a little bit. I'd love to hear more of your thoughts, but the concept that we've been convinced to believe in these radical ideologies because people tell us that it's compassionate or it's empathetic. And they genuinely target Christians and say, this is the way to have Christian compassion. You need to tell women that their body, their choice. You need to welcome illegal, violent criminals into your country, and you need to honor someone's choice to change their gender despite the fact that it's impossible. And Allie Beth Stuckey talks about this really well, and she has this term toxic empathy. I'd love to hear your encouragement to Christians who feel the pressure to bow to radical ideology out of the desire to be compassionate.
Yeah, well, I love Allie Beth Stuckey. I think Allie Beth is doing an incredible job with what she's doing, and her books are absolutely amazing. I would encourage the audience to go read her books. But the most loving thing you can tell someone is the truth. It is one of the most incompassionate, one of the most inhumane things to tell someone to go cut off their healthy breasts and genitals just because they feel like the opposite sex. That's one of the most life-destructive decisions that you could possibly make. It's irreversible, especially to tell a child who can't even drive a car, they can't drink alcohol, they can't make life decisions. They don't even know what they're going to do when they grow up, but all of a sudden they can determine whether or not they want to cut off their healthy breasts and genitals. That's one of the most non-loving, non-compassionate, uncompassionate things you could possibly tell someone. So the most loving thing you can do for someone is tell them the truth. But my message to conservatives, to Christians especially, is to not be afraid of people name calling. I think a lot of times, especially young people, young women are, I don't want to be called a bigot. I don't want to be called a transphobe or homophobic. And my response to that, anyone who says you're homophobic, anytime someone calls me transphobe or bigot, I say, well, you know what? I think you're just truth-phobic. I think you're just science-phobic.
I love that.
But I think at the end of the day, I mean, if we can't fight for truth now, when do we think we're going to fight? Because, you look at past revolutions, you look at past times when Christians were standing up for what they were believing. Even look at why we left England in the first place to come here for religious freedom, to come here to be able to fight for the ability to practice our faith without fear of persecution, without fear of a tyrannical dictator coming after us and killing us for our faith and what we believe in. And so if those people were willing to stand up then, if they were willing to fight back against the persecution, against the tyranny, and we aren't even willing to fight back now with a few name calls, or maybe we lose some friends, maybe we even lose a job. If we aren't willing to fight then, how do we expect to fight back, to fight for what we believe in and fight for our children and the next generations when they are truly killing Christians in the street? And I know that might sound gruesome to some people, but that's the reality of it. If we are not willing to fight, to stand up, to pay attention, to educate ourselves on what's happening now, we never will.
That's such a good way to put it. And kind of following with the audience out there who's listening today, what message would you give them what's something they can do within the next 3 months where they could share their values like you have, and you've created a platform for yourself to speak truth? What examples or who would you kind of send them to look at or read or watch, or what platforms should they go to get their values out that they believe in, and the conservative values or anything like that? Like, what are good platforms where they can take an active stance right now?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite quotes from Thomas Jefferson is, "The best defense against tyranny is a well-informed citizenry." And I think the reason why we're here is because we have such a lack of knowledge. So many people tell me, I just don't really care about politics. It's just not my thing. And I say to that, I think that statement kind of comes from a place of ignorance, because if I showed you the pictures of these aborted babies, there's no way you could tell me that you don't care about that. If I showed you the conditions that a lot of these pro-lifers, these January 6ers, the conditions that they went through in prison when the FBI and our federal government under the previous administration went after them and was weaponized against American citizens, if I showed you those pictures and the videos and their testimonials, if I showed you that, there's no way that you could say that you don't care about politics. So I think a lot of the statements that we make as conservative Christians is coming from a place of ignorance and just the lack of knowledge, the lack of knowing what is actually happening in the true history. So not that I'm giving a plug to my book, but I highly encourage the audience to get my book, Last Chance to Save Our Republic. A lot of the issues that we talked about today, I break down in a deeper form in the book, from the founding of the American nation, the Second Amendment, the communist kind of ties and similarities between, Mao's Cultural Revolution and his takeover of the Second Amendment there, to now we've got like Adam Schiff and even some conservative politicians that want to impose red red flag laws, which are absolutely unconstitutional. So get the book, Last Chance to Save Our Republic. I break down a lot of these issues in there. But two, I think as a woman watching this, especially since this is the Center for Conservative Women, Gen Z Unplugged podcast, I think as a young woman, get involved with the Center for Conservative Women, host events, talk to your peers. I mean, be willing to have these hard conversations, because that's where we're going to see change happen, is in our own communities, when we're willing to engage in tough conversations and have these conversations like, hey, like, why are you wearing, my body, my choice? Like, what does that mean to you? What does my body, my choice mean to you? Or what does women's rights really do mean to you? Because if a woman's right is to choose, what is she choosing? To kill the life that was conceived inside of her? Because, that isn't loving. And explaining the deep roots of the abortion industry and what an abortion actually looks like and how this is anti-woman at its finest. So yeah, be willing to have these conversations, educate, inform yourself, get involved with the Center for Conservative Women, contact you guys. I think that would be my best advice, especially to young women in today's age.
So many good pieces of wisdom just in everything you said. So obviously people can get a copy of the book. Where can they get the book? And then outside of Gen Z Unplugged, how can people get in touch with you?
My podcast, The Hannah Faulkner Show, I do a pre-recorded show 3-ish times a week on there. And then I have a live show with a network, Live from America, LFA TV on Rumble. My book, you can get it on Cultures. I guess you can't get it on cultureof1776.com, which is my website. But it'll take your audience to Amazon, or they can get it on like any online bookstore. So cultureof1776.com, all the links to my social media platforms and the book are on there.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today, Hannah. We really appreciate it and absolutely loved having you on today.
Thank you guys so much for having me.